All right. So today is what? March something? What's today's date?
5th.
March 5th,
Today's March
2020. Black Land Ownership Weekly Meeting. We are doing it. We are hosting weekly gatherings, even while we travel. For the folks that will open up this time capsule in the future, this is the time period where Melissa and I rented out our apartment and just traveled from place to place for like 2 months straight. But a lot of good things are brewing for Black Land Ownership and some opportunities. And I want to check in and get some updates from you, Grant, on what you've been thinking. Or for a while you were looking into some things and you've been thinking about trying to get a place for your parents, or what the long-term plan might be for cohabitation and stuff. So it'd be good to chat about. And market reports. I'm not really going to give you numbers and data and statistics, but there are some things that we should discuss about the commercial as well as residential market right now.
Yeah. All right. Well, all of the above. I mean, there are. I have been thinking, something's been popping up in my mind a bunch of times in the last few weeks, is something that you, Chris, talked to me about a couple months ago, probably now, about commercial real estate for storage, and being something that actually could, in a relatively short amount of time, have a good return on an investment for land. And that I was shocked to learn some of the numbers you shared with me about just how big the public storage kind of industry is, like how many billions of dollars. Totally took me by surprise. And so I've looked into a little bit of that myself, but I know you have looked into it more and have some interesting things that you shared with me, or I may not know where they are, but I'm sure I can get them from you again. So that's been bouncing around my head. But yeah, my parents are in a situation where my mom is Parkinson's disease and just had a double mastectomy for breast cancer. And my parents are both very old. My dad is 81 and my mom is 77, and they have much more difficulty getting around these days. And they live on a second-story walk-up in a small apartment in Bridgeport. And I'm trying to think of a way we can maybe buy them a bigger place to live in, where they aren't just paying rent money to a third party. And that has me thinking about a lot of what Black Land Ownership has been involved in, and getting land, but also getting land and doing kind of unusual things with it, not the typical kind of run-of-the-mill why you buy land kind of thing that I would think a lot of us were probably raised with. That, you buy land that has a house, and usually it's a single occupancy house, and usually you're doing it just to live in it and hoping that it accrues some value over a long period of time, as opposed to things like conservation land and the clever things you can maybe do with conservation land that still qualify as conservation, but you can get a little bit more use out of it than just staying off the land. And things like land that has a single wide on it and has things that maybe you didn't think you were looking for at first, but that you can use in multi-purpose ways. And also thinking about places well beyond the reach of the metropolitan kind of New York area. I grew up in this area, and I think I often view it as it really hasn't been until the last 6 months to a year of my life, or the last year and a half, that I've realized just how expensive everything is in this whole vicinity comparative to everything else. That if you just go outside, 2.5, 3.5 hours outside the New York City limits, you're finding things that are drastically more affordable than what you'll find just an hour and a half, 2 hours outside the city. And in almost every direction, it seems there's very little that feels affordable in the Long Island area. There's very little that feels affordable anywhere New Jersey, near, with direct access to New York City. Um, and uh, Hudson Valley area, like, used to be considered, a kind of more affordable area compared to that a lot of New Yorkers were getting away to if they could afford that property up there. And now I look at that and I'm just like, this is not doable at all. So I'm also a full-time artist. For those who don't know me, well, full-time musician, and I don't have the amount of money a bank would give me to put down on a house is way less than what houses cost around here. So this demand's getting very creative with your property and with your prospects. So thinking about that more broadly, and yeah.
Well, I appreciate that, yo. You bring up a lot of different points. One, I think, can't be overstated is what's the plan as we age and as the people we care about age, and are there systems set in place that we're happy with? For me, the answer was no. Like, I don't like the current modus operandi of how people approach managing the elderly, what the options are, what living conditions end up being. And that's for people that are elder now, let alone how things would be different for us as the population increases, as proximity to space changes and cost and expense change. And what can really be done to prepare for that, or to put ourselves in a position where we are at least able to adapt and be flexible and not at the mercy of, if that makes sense. The other part you mentioned is, what is our relationship to the urban areas, and how necessary is it that we are there all of the time? I'm not suggesting that people move out to the middle of nowhere and have no plan. I'm not suggesting that cities are horrible, but there is a question of, you can be in New York City, make $70,000-$80,000 a year and not be able to get an apartment you'd want to live in. Is that something everyone should fight for? It makes sense if you're in certain fields or professions or arenas that you need to be in New York City itself. But are there opportunities for people to be in New York part-time and in another part of the state or country part-time? And what does that really look like when it comes to you're raising children? What does that really look like if you're taking care of other family members? What does that really look like in terms of how people are going to be able to generate revenue? And is it better to go less in debt, pay off early, pool resources with people like family members, and actually own so there's no mortgage? Or is it get a big place and in 30 years you've paid it off? Now you may have added hundreds of thousands of dollars to it in that 30 years, but you may have also held on to property that has accrued in its value far more than whatever you've had to pay in interest rates. But those are, I think, questions people have to ask themselves, and not really go into it kind of blindly, or just like, oh, I heard it's a good idea, but really kind of think about for your personal scenario. And in terms of how to utilize land, whether it's in the commercial capacity, which you mentioned with storage. And I think I'd like to learn more. I want to do more research. Storage seems like a viable option for people that don't have to be there. You can, especially with technology now, if you look at an example like a music studio, you would have thought 20, 30 years ago, it would be impossible to automate a music studio or rehearsal space and make sure that everyone had the equipment they needed, make sure things didn't get stolen or damaged or what have you, get them checked in, all this other stuff. Well, Pirate Studios is an example of a startup that has automated live rehearsal and performance space, and their rates are lower. They have popped up in multiple countries, and they have a model that's scalable. Theoretically, storage and self-storage couldn't be an easier thing to automate. So can you have 17 different storage facilities and still be a musician, versus can you have 5 farms and still be a musician? me personally, I think it would be impossible to have 5 farms and still do music hard if you're actually involved with the farms. So I
Right.
think people have to figure out like where their time is going to be spent. Melissa said something a number of weeks ago, months ago, about her life planning and like, is what I'm doing now something I'd want to be doing or be proud of when I'm older, like still doing it or like active in it. And I think that's not like a prognostication, like I have to know what I'm going to do in the future, but if I'm smoking 2 packs of cigarettes today, am I going to be happy with that in 30 years? Like, will I want to be doing that? No, I don't. You know, if I am having to be at the farm 365, I can't travel because I'm taking care of however many animals. Is that something I want to be consistent in my life for 20 or 30 years? And be honest about that. Would I find it interesting having some museum slash storage facility and have 8 of them in different states? That might be something that could, you know, pique my interest for a long amount of time, especially the museum part and making museum out of the stuff that people would normally have to auction because they can't afford it. Imagine me not throwing people's stuff away, but being able to enshrine some of it in a museum and then help them make the money to be able to keep their make money to keep their stuff in storage. Like
That would be
different,
very cool. Yeah.
you know.
Well,
Uh
and that leads to, I think, another thing that probably that drives a lot of what Blackland ownership is about, and drives a lot of what people who would be tuning into this would be interested in, which is, to put it in like simple kind of anti-establishment kind of speech, like I don't want to go to the banks. I don't want to go to the money lenders and deal with all that. Like, why can't we figure out ways to collaborate on a kind of more grassroots and community level to figure out the answers to these problems, as opposed to uh, just sucking it up and going into debt, or paying, whatever interest rate someone has decided at any given point in time is what you need to pay in order to borrow money.
so something to look at is, let's say you're buying a commercial property or residential, you are allowed to take over people's mortgages. So when you're buying, and if you have a real estate agent or you yourself are able to communicate or have your lawyer communicate with the seller, you can try to preempt them completing their mortgage agreement, selling you basically the full package from the bank, and you starting a new mortgage agreement. You can take over their previous one. And with commercial spaces, if you approach someone selling and they're not in a situation where like they're liquidating because they have no money, but they just want a different, they're like changing businesses. Some of them would rather get a big chunk up front, keep you on owner finance so that they also get a monthly check, and you now don't have to go through the
Huh.
same process of developing the finance because they're probably already having a mortgage arrangement, or sorry, a financing arrangement with their investor. So with commercial properties, you're not going to have a quote unquote mortgage in the same way, but you do have normally a finance plan, and you do normally have an investor or someone who has paid for the property. And there's the equivalent of a monthly cost to pay off the initial investment or funding. We're going to go straight on here for a long time.
Oh,
Um, and so that's something to think about, is going into the negotiations asking for things as opposed to being told what's available to you, and then
Sure.
finding the right deal or situation for you. One of the last things, though, you mentioned one more thing that I wanted to approach.
community bank.
Oh, I will. I would love to hear other thoughts, or as people do research and learn strategies for pooling money. Our government and our Bureau of Taxation has figured out just about all the ways people make money together. They've then categorized them, and depending on how you do it, it's wildly different in who has what responsibilities. So whether you want to do incorporation, whether you're a sole proprietor, whether you want to do a uh what's the B Corp, like where
B
it's,
Corp.
yeah, B Corp, and where there's something about like you're doing social good, whether you're gonna file your LLC, but then file with the tax office as a not-for-profit, 501(c)(3) or 501(c)(4), and do lobbying, or you could start a social club, which is also tax exempt. Whether you want to bury people on your property. And if you're in Florida, if you have a cemetery on your property, you don't pay property taxes, and your property, sorry, if you still have property taxes, but your property can never be taken away for failure to pay property taxes or something crazy like that.
Wow.
There's a reason why Donald Trump buried his family member at one of his golf courses.
Is that only in Florida or is it throughout the United States?
I know that you're able to do that in Florida. I didn't look into what other states allow that.
Wow.
Also, keep in mind though, if you want to bury people on your property, that requires certain paperwork. Melissa and I were talking about this earlier. The notion of folks will scare you saying it's hard. Like you tell somebody, I want to buy land with 6 of my homies, and someone's like, are y'all already a business? No. Any of y'all married? No. Y'all have girlfriends, kids? Yeah. They're all going to be like, don't do that. That's difficult. Okay. How do people do it though? Like, how have people in the past done it so that the kids can't tell the other owners what to do through some weird inheritance because someone gets sick and dies? How do you manage when someone divorces, remarries, and now the new person hates everything that had been going on for 10 years?
Living trust.
You know, and there's paperwork for all that. So when you have the idea, be prepared for people to say, that's difficult, you don't want to do that. And be prepared to be like, I do want to do it. Are you telling me you don't know the lawyers or the business folks or the tax people that can manage it? And just admit your inability as opposed to say it's impossible. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think Rob's in now. Yeah. And on the last point with the commercial real estate, I think you're starting to notice it now, how many empty spaces there are in otherwise vibrant neighborhoods. And as you travel, you know, if any of y'all are traveling outside of New York, try to take note and see when you're in populated areas that look vibrant, that look like they have new stores, but then there's still vacant stores. Like down in South Beach in Miami, it's prevalent, where right next to a really poppin' and a lot of commercial leases are ending in like this year and over the next like previous 6 months and the next coming 6 months. And with the interest rates and the cost and expense, people aren't renewing them. So that may lead to an advantage for people who want to get property that's multi-use or can be converted into storage space or converted into a different type of commercial property. In some places, they're trying to convert empty office buildings into housing, like DC. They're like incentivizing that happening instead of the office building just sitting vacant for years. If that makes sense.
You know, my biggest question is, we all want to get property and we all want to do something. But there's a reason that we all met in New York City, because our skills are more dependent on a marketplace like New York City. So my question is, even if we get this land, and I see the stuff you're doing, Chris, out in Black land ownership, how are we going to sustain ourselves if we're so far away from a metropolitan city where a lot of our skills are being used?
Well, I think they're how about if we approach the question almost from a before the question point of why do we only have to be in one place? That would be my starting point. I don't think non-migratory patterns are going to be good for me. Like for what I do to make art and learn about the world and to take the art and music to people in person, I have to go places. In order for me to speak at these conferences, whether it's AI or whether it's Black land ownership or conservation or music conferences, I have to go to where they are. So my plan has to include migratory patterns with home base setup because I also need structure. Everyone's going to have a different parameter on that. Some people are going to have children and those children aren't going to leave their schools. Some people won't have children and they'll have different options. Other people will be taking care of their parents or grandparents or brothers or sisters, who knows, you know? But I think the first question is, how migratory do you want to be? The second question then becomes, why do we think we know what skills we have of benefit where? Like, have we tried to do what we do in other places where there are institutions? Now, it may be very difficult to be independent and do certain things, but there may be parts of the country that Grant could go to and in a month book more gigs playing singer-songwriter slash country covers and make who knows how much money than staying in New York City. Or maybe there's so many wealthy people in New York City, it's really the only place where someone's going to pay you $1,300 to do a show, like a wedding, and you might even be able to get up to 2,500, and then you just do 3 of those a month. You're making reasonable amount of money, and you can live out in wherever you are. Do you have to be in New York City to make those connections? I don't know. Like, that would be for other people to figure out.
Right.
Yeah,
But
I mean, I will say on that there are some of those pockets, because I'm been networking with people who are across the country and do kind of what I do, and I'm astonished at how many of them live in places like Utah or Savannah, Georgia. Or I have one buddy who goes down to Key West literally like every couple months, or like every 3 months or so. He just flies down there and stays for a month because he makes more money, even with the insane like cost of the airline tickets. He still is just making so much money while he's down there just playing gigs that it's totally worth it. So yeah.
yeah, and the institutional thing changes, right? When I'm in New York City, I don't want to work for an institution. Sure. I want to be independent. I want to own my name, my likeness, my image, the products that I make, in the idea that I will make connections and can sell them at some point, and I will have retained ownership the entire time. I want to be able to say, I did this, and no one can say, no, it was actually part of some other operation and yakety yak. It's like, no, what we built, we built. Like, you can see who did it. But when I go upstate, there will be none of that. And so I'm working with the institution up there. And so I think it's finding the balance of how institutional you want to be, when and where, and what will the institutions pay for. When you go to certain places, you say you from New York. Homeboy Sandman told me this decades ago. Like, when me and Keith first started Brooklyn Wildlife, we interviewed Homeboy Sandman, and he was like, "Yo, it's like the New York Express card, yo. Anywhere you go, people show love. Awesome, you from New York, we respect it. Like, y'all are some of the illest people in the world." And that still exists. I'm not saying to be egocentric or geocentric on New York actually being whatever, but there is a reality at the pace and the magnitude we've done things. When you go to some of these other areas, you may become the director of the local museum. You may be able to be the art, you know, whatever it might be for that local institution that will give you a salary. Now, it may not be salary compared to New York, but it allows for you to still be indie, go to New York sometimes and do whatever else you do. I don't know. I see the options. I see people up here that go back and forth between the city and upstate, and they seem to benefit more from doing that than staying just in one of the places, if that makes sense.
100%.
Now, again, there are people up here who have not gone to New York City in 27 years, have no need to. In New York, I lived in New York for 12, 13 years before, 14 years before I went up to Cooperstown or however long. So, I think it's there. It requires a lot of soul searching. Melissa, do you have anything to say here?
To that particular question?
Or anything at all?
I mean, I think that a really strong point Chris made was the idea of it's so dependent on context of if you have children, if you are working remotely, what kind of work you do, and whether or not sort of your goals are to be able to move around, or you want to have like the consistent structure and stay in one place, even if I mean, for me, cities across the board, but especially New York, are just too expensive to have the kind of space that I know that I need for at least half the year. I mean, I can live in a tiny little apartment for half the year if I have space in other parts of the year. That's just important to me. and I want to be out in nature and I don't want to be surrounded by wires and, you know, all kinds of electric waves, and I want to be able to get food from the ground. So those things unfortunately don't happen in cities. So that means even if some of my work is dependent on cities, I have to find a way to make it work out in a natural space as well. And that's not, unfortunately, just right outside the city. So, and I think a lot of people benefit from that. And I think our society is shifting to, I think part of the work that I feel passionate about with Black land ownership is making sure that more people have that access, because it's so imperative to health, in my opinion. So if that means helping people to find spaces where they can afford, if that means sharing space, if that means, you know, I don't know. I don't know all the different options, but there are many.
Yeah, and back to one of the things you mentioned earlier, Grant, of trying to go outside of traditional banking institutions. There is one problem in that the how value has been set. When people could not get loans or we didn't have health insurance, we look at the cost of then housing or medical procedures. Once people realized insurance companies or banks would front end certain parts, the exorbitant increase in cost is the fuel in housing, the banks getting larger returns on their interest rates that they dole out. If you're a bank, would you rather have to give a loan where the house is 60,000, it fits two people, and the person can come up with 7,000 themselves, and you now give them, 53,000, and over 30 years, what that's going to be, as opposed to have a 400,000, like fund a developer building 12 $500,000 houses, and now you get money from that, and then the people that need to take out the $450,000 or $400,000 loan, and how that will compound over time. So in places where there has been a lot of economic activity, it's almost expected that you will not be able to buy your property outright, and that you will have to take on a very large loan. With commercial real estate, you're often penalized if you pay off the loan early. With residential, not always the case. And so looking at parts of the country that don't have the economic activity, you'll find houses that are $70,000. Will you be able to find a contractor that can fix them? Will you be able to find a plumber if the one who everyone knows decides they don't like you? And so it's something to consider, that can you get around the funding problem in any area you would want to be in? And if so, is that through collective fundraising? Is that through friends? Like when people get married, they really donate real money so that their friends have down payment money? Is it through families collectively buying properties and then being able to leverage the equity into capital to then purchase property for the children? I mean, I think these are like collective economics, and thinking of how to create land funds get you into securities in areas I can't speak on and don't know anything about. That's legal stuff. But I think you're talking that, Grant. You're talking like 15-year-olds working together to start creating their own funds so that by the time they're 25 or 30, they have money to do something with.
Yeah, I can tell you that if I knew what I know now at 15, I would feel like a much more financially stable person. That's for sure.
I mean, I think I like to think so. I also think, what's the point? Like, money's fake. And so until people have a reason, I feel like they'll blow it. Like if I had saved up however much money before I was 40, when I got in that bike crash, I would have blown it. Or however old I was when that happened. Or when I was 35 and I thought I was gonna get evicted, I would have, like, whatever. Or when whatever else happened, I would have just. So I'm at the, and while talking to y'all, I thought about it. I'm in the world of wonder phase. So that when I'm in the city, I want to be filled with wonderment about all the beautiful things and people that can happen in the city that can't happen outside of it. And when I'm out in the countryside or the woods or the ocean or the desert, I want to be filled with wonder and not be mad at any of the things that are, but not feel trapped by any of it either, if that makes sense.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So now, just a plan of action for us moving forward. Have you come together with a number of people who are willing to experiment and put some resources towards finding a piece of land and just experimenting and us doing everything we're talking about? Or are we still in that beta stage of just trying to pull people on board?
Well, I think people, how would I approach this? I would say, what level of responsibility would people like? And are there a number of people that have the freedom to really experiment? Coming out of pandemic, I don't think a lot of people had the stability to then play around or experiment or lose money or time. I think we didn't have the experience to be able to say, just trust us and put up $8,000, it will work. I don't think we were around people who had that were completed the other things that they've already dedicated themselves to. So I think now is a really good time where people are sorting through how serious they would want to be, what their use would be, what their commitment would be. We offered certain people opportunities to go up on property with us, and folks chose not to. Some people chose to just support by donating cash or donating time, or one of the homies gave us really good insight in how to roll our closing fees into our mortgage so that we ended up saving money at a certain point. Other people have put us in contact with folks who then we've been able to work with and save money. But I don't know a lot of people that say, I got $5,000 I can just lose. And are
But
and
if we're, I'm sorry, Chris, I didn't mean to cut you off. And I just was saying, like, we're not going to lose anything by buying land, right? We're the experiment and stuff. But I get everything you're saying. I get everything you're saying, and 100% on board.
I think it is, I'm not sure why people are so cautious or have such trepidation around land when historically it's been discussed in such a positive way or in such a manner of, as long as you don't get fleeced. But I think people hear it's difficult. They hear you have to get a lawyer. They hear there's a title company. They hear horror stories of, I bought this property and found out A, B, or C. Instead of literally looking around them, and every single person we're looking at is paying a landlord or is a landlord. So clearly it's worked out for somebody out here. But are we taught that? And I don't mean just as Black folks, but I mean in whatever communities we grew up in, did people say, don't worry about them handbags, dog. 5 handbags is the down payment on a property out in the middle of nowhere. No, I didn't get told that growing up. I got told, yo, your family has property in the middle of nowhere, sell it, and you can go buy some handbags. You know? But I think people have to be prepared to lose it, or else they'll be mad at themselves or other people if it doesn't quote unquote work. Whatever their idea or dream is, I'm on it's about the mission. It's about the learning process. I spent how many tens of thousands of dollars to go to college to utilize that education. If all that happens is I lose $5,000, but learned a lot in a 3-year time period, I'm not mad. But other people might go into it like, no, if I put up this 5K, I better come back with 7K in 13 months. And if this happens, I want to fight somebody. And they shouldn't do that to themselves, you know?
I got a couple questions there, Chris, if you're done, but keep going.
Yeah, just the last thing I was going to say is we also aren't proselytizing. I do not run around the country telling people join our land group, be a part of our buying circle, any of that other stuff. I don't want other people's money wrapped up in my stuff until I know they are so about it that I feel almost challenged, like, oh, damn, dog, you're so serious. And so it's also my fault, you know. Now,
I
Grant,
was
what's
gonna
your question?
say, yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, that all, I mean, that word with all that, I was gonna say that the um
I can't hear you. If
Are
you're
you
talking, can you speak up?
yes. Um, what is the have you made any sense of the change that people have been talking about? Like I hear so many people these days coming at it from a lot of different angles. Um, so I tend to the diversity of the opinions tends to tell me that there's something to it, but that land is not as well. I don't know if it's specifically land. It could be just like property, like a home or something like that. But that buying, real estate effectively is not as good an investment as it used to be. And what do you think is kind of the reason behind that, or is that not true? Or
I I'll jump in on that one, and I'm not, and I wouldn't say by any means I'm, there's many opinions on this. I I think it is it is an amazing asset having land, and it's going to go up and down like any other asset that exists. So if you're working in the stock market, if you're working in crypto, if you're working in art, if you're whatever it is, things go up and down. Land is no different in that sense. The big difference is it's disappearing, and it's not an endless thing that you can just, you know, buy at any time, really.
it's a scarce commodity. Yeah.
And people are buying it, basically corporations, the government, are really buying up land, because when you have land, you have power, you have ability to be autonomous, you have resources, and the more I mean, basically, eventually, you're going to be having to ask other people to do things, like, which is what's happening in cities. A lot of people can't own there, so you're constantly, yes, someone else has to do the dirty work, but someone else also makes all the decisions, and you just give them money. So that's what the world looks like if you don't kind of invest in the asset of land for you and your community and your people and whatnot. I think so. I think land is an amazing asset. I don't think it is a false thing. And it's age old.
Yeah, I mean, there. If you approach land like another asset or security, are there possibly other investments that yield a greater return in whatever amount of time? So, is it possible in crypto for you to double in a year? Yep. People that invested in Bitcoin a year ago are at double today. Does that mean it's a good investment? For certain people, yeah. Other people, no. For housing, are the interest rates at a point where if you buy now, you are going to benefit in trying to sell in 3, 5, 7, 12 years? Who can say? Were interest rates better 4 years ago? Yep. So there are going to be people who say now's not a good time. But there are going to be other people that look up in 4 years from now that say, wow, we should have invested 4 years ago. It would have been really great to invest. We can't go back in time. So what do you watch for? One thing would be inflated prices. Following the past 3 years, it's possible you could get locked into a high interest rate and be buying a house off a person that bought in 2 or 3 years ago and got fleeced, and they're now trying to fleece you. So yeah, you could run into a problem where you buy a $600,000 house and have to sell it for $604,000, and you already spent $10,000 on legal fees. You spent whatever moving, and you don't make the money you expected. But if you have an awareness of where you're investing or what your numbers are, like what you need from it, I don't think now is horrible in any capacity. Yes, there have been better times where the housing was less expensive, where the interest rates were lower, where if you were trying to sell, there was more movement and volatility within the market, so it was easier to sell. Right now, it appears sales are slowing, depending on where you are in the country. But Melissa's not wrong in that major, like, I don't want to say corporations as like a blanket, but like major funds, like investors, like not just people who are in the business of real estate, that see an opportunity. But people who sit on bundles of money and they analyze different industries, and one year they're like, paper, that's making money. Let's put 100 million into it. Cool. Then the next year they're like, oh, crypto, what's happening? Cool. We'll play around with that, and then we'll jump out of it right before everything crashes. Then the next year it might be real estate, and they are buying up so much land. Apparently Jeff Bezos is now on his land thing, and he's starting to buy up hundreds of thousands of acres. So the consolidation of all this appears to be inevitable. And so whether it's entertainment, whether it's farms and large scale farming, agribusiness, whether it's real estate and land itself, the consolidation is happening. What, you know?
I would also add in that I am specifically, and I think, I'm not sure what Chris is, but I am specifically talking about also like land. Like, I'm not saying shouldn't buy houses or whatnot, but I'm also not saying that like purchasing a house in Detroit this year is the best way to go, or, you know, I mean,
Right.
there are risky investments when you're getting into real estate, but actual land like property and
Yeah.
and nature, unfortunately, which we shouldn't be able to buy, but we do, you know. I mean, this is something that also, depending on what you bring to that space, you can make it flourish. And there's so many possibilities now of ways that you can actually work with the land and create something really unique that people are also seeking, but that could also carry you for as long as you wanted it to, you know? So
Right.
I have a
think
question.
it's interesting.
So now, just hypothetically speaking, say last meeting I was at, it was Gravity and Moon. This meeting is Grant. So say we have Gravity, Moon, Grant, me, 4 people, and then you guys. Hypothetically speaking, everybody's friends, everybody's committed. We all know we need land and we want to move forward. What would be a plan of action? Or how do you envision us really putting together a first project and saying this is Black land ownership, this is the prototype for people who want to move forward, invest? You know, do you have that vision, Chris and Melissa?
I am waiting to see who wants to do what. I have learned through Brooklyn Wildlife that I like doing certain things as director, co-director, third party. The other times I like everyone to be already moving in a certain direction and we come together like Voltron. Probably on this, I haven't seen a project 7 people want to do yet. And so the first thing would be that, and I wouldn't be able to redirect attention to figure that out. Like if 4 of y'all were like, hey, we got this idea we want to do. It's going to cost $20,000. You know, 10,000 to get the land, 15 to get the land, this for the lawyer, this for that. If it's something I'd want to do, well, then it's sitting down and figuring out how it all looks. If it's not, then it's like, well, do I help find the people that would be interested, or do we help strategize better so that you might be able to save some of the money and not need that 5th person, or, you know, talk through it. But
Yeah, I feel like
with things on this magnitude and where it's like you have to start a new legal entity to pursue it, then people would also have to have an agreement about how much they care about the law and taxes and paperwork and, you know, significant others having involvement if they're not the ones who have put up money and, you know, all types of stuff that none of us have talked about. So I wouldn't begin to plan towards that without those discussions. What are your thoughts?
I kind of look at it like, you know, there are 2 ways that I feel like we have been working. And one is there have been people that come to us and say, we're interested in this project. We found this actual space. This one happened recently where we found this actual space. This is what we see, you know, we think it's a good price. This is what we're able to put into it. This is what we would like your involvement to be. And what are your thoughts? And so that gives us an opportunity to actually look at something and say, like, is this something that we can are we able to do what they think we can do? Number one. Number two, can we support this, through community? Does it support other people in the community? Does it support our overall mission? Number three, do we want, are we all on the same page? Are the things that they're offering and able to do, going to does it feel equitable? And so that's one way. Another way that comes through that I feel like happens is people saying, okay, there's three of us that are really interested in doing this project. We don't know if you want to be involved or not, but we want to do it. How can Black land ownership actually help support us in making this come to fruition? But in both scenarios, typically the people have like the plan, like the group comes, they have the plan, they're ready. And then the other scenario would be that we were, if we were sitting and talking to, if we find things and we put it out to the community and we say, we want to do this, we've been looking at it, but we can't do this one alone. Who wants to be involved? So, I mean, I feel like those are the three things that kind of work, that kind of end up, that's how things have been in conversation as of late.
Cool.
You were gonna
I
say
mean, I
something,
think,
Grant?
no, you go ahead, Rob.
I mean, before Melissa spoke, I think you was gonna say something. And so my interest, obviously, since just meeting Melissa and Chris Carr, they've been like inspiration. And obviously, I was in Trinidad during the pandemic, so I went through my own rites of passage of understanding. I've lived my whole life in New York City in a shoebox in the sky, and I really just want to that balance that Chris was talking about of being able to come to the city whenever I want, but also having a home base in nature somewhere, that's better for my mental health. Now, the whole issue is like me, myself alone, I really don't see myself doing it all by myself. I don't see how it could be done. I don't have the resources to get it done. So what I love so much about this Black land ownership and what Chris and Melissa is doing is there's so many of us here in New York who are artists, who have apartments, who now, because of Chris Carr and Melissa, we want something like that. That's what the last meeting I was on, where Gravity and Moon was talking about. And I feel it every time we go to Gamba, or every time we go upstate, we feel it. We want that same thing and we don't know how to acquire it. So that's the only reason I'm bringing up these questions. It's like, I think, the time is now. We feel it and we know it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it sounds like where Black land ownership is kind of right now. It's in the stage of Rob, if you like found a property that you were just like, oh my God, this would be perfect, and we could use it in this way and this way and this way. And I want to
Well,
try to
Grant,
help get people together. Yeah.
recently, because I'm all about experimenting, right? And I'm all about knowing that nothing is forever. So recently I posted something where it's an hour and a half away from the city, but it's not a lot of land. And that's what Chris was telling me. And this is what I'm understanding more and more. We have to really come together and we all have to be in agreement, because we want acres, or do we want 3 lots? You know what I'm saying? Because like it's all about money. And then also too, that's why I asked about, well, how far away from New York City do some of us want to be? Because I know right now in my immediate stage, I only make money in New York City, and it would take time to develop those relationships to make money outside in New York State with those institutions that Chris Carr was talking about. So just as an experiment on Craigslist, I found something, 3 acres, not 3 acres, 3 lots, half an acre. It's an hour and a half away from the city, but it's just land. So you would have to build something on it. But in my mind, I'm thinking like this is like a base camp for people who have never left New York City. They are interested in leaving New York City, but they are too integrated in the system because that's the only way they know how to make money. So it's like, we can't go, all of us can't go cold turkey. You know what I'm saying? So that's just where my mind is right now.
Well, so if a person, let's say, Rob, you were like, I have an idea, it's an experiment. The total cost is $30,000 and it'll be three of us. if I need to put up $10,000, you'd have to keep in mind that in order for us to get the 22 acres and the house and the stuff all the way up, there's a $30,000 down payment, right? We were able to raise a certain amount of money, but most of it came from savings.
Yeah, most of that. was from-
And that's the biggest investment in anything I've ever made post college. So the idea that I could just do that again as an experiment when I've seen how difficult it's been now that we have this property, you'd have to then do the calculus on, is that worth the size of the property? Is that worth the distance? Is that worth the building code issues? And in certain circumstances, it might be. If there's some idea or some land or some property and it has some view or it has some, a freshwater spring or there's some waterfall, who knows what might make it worth that value? But if the biggest thing I've ever invested in my life and that's changed my life took $15,000, then I don't want to downplay how major $3, $5, or $7,000 might be for people. And for
Nah,
other
it's a
people,
lot.
right? For other people, that's play money. So I think
Yeah.
it's also getting into different pools so that the guy who approached us with a recent opportunity, he has an investor in the property. We'd have to put up money on the down payment part, but the investor is going to cover all the renovation, which would be tens of thousands of dollars that none of us would have.
Even more.
And so there are going to be scenarios where you don't have to have all the money up front, but you need to have the game plan. So the other person's like, dog, I got the bread. I just didn't know how to do this. And you're like, well, I knew how to do everything else. You got the bread. I do everything else. And so for your idea, Rob, I would really be proactive in identifying counties that have very lax or non-restrictive building code and zoning laws. Most places have a minimum in New York State. New York's very paternal, have a minimum square footage size for you building an habitable dwelling. If it's going to be a habitable dwelling, it has to be connected to septic or sewage. It has to be connected to some form of grid in order for you to get a mortgage if you plan to sell it in the future. If your idea is I'll go buy a piece of land, put up a trailer or build a hut, mad places would not let you do that. There are places that will, but the people selling you land will lie. The real estate people will lie. The people on the internet will say they got a tiny house village and they're lying.
Yes.
So make sure you really, research, and that will help you pick where you do it. There are only going to be a certain number of municipalities that will allow what you're trying to do.
I got you. I mean, since we last spoke, I've just been doing more and more research and flushing out the idea. This specific grant, just to let you in, this specific idea is in Wurtsville or Sullivan County, which is an hour and a half away, and it's not the land idea, more so the building of a house out there in a suburban area, which is a middle class. Because even Chris, I remember one time we were walking down the street and we randomly asked the lady if she would go on a hiking trip 4 hours away, or would she rather go? And she said, if maybe it was an hour away, I would do it. So this also led us to believe a lot of people are reluctant to leave far from the New York City, but an hour to 2 hours, they're like, that's no problem. But 4 hours, a lot of people who are in New York City find that stressful, right? So that's why I'm like, and this is where my mindset is all about this experiment. Is like, okay, something in between what Chris Carr has and what we have right now in the city, a middle ground to get people comfortable. And then the next stage is get us closer to what Chris Carr has, which is that Amish experience, real, rustic homesteading vibe, as we develop this new lifestyle.
So one of the things you would want to, or that you could that could behoove you would be making relationships with the folks that either have access to private trails, whether that's hiking clubs or things of that nature, land trust, or if they're national parks in the area, go to the plaza.
Straight, right?
Yeah. So that you're actually able to do hiking and camping. One of the reasons we went 3.5 to 4 hours away is because almost anything within an hour and a half to 2 hours away is actually just suburbia. It is not the wilderness. It is not rustic. It is just suburbia
Mm-hmm.
and sprawl. And so
And
you
so,
have,
Chris, don't you
yeah.
think that might play into the idea of like this cold turkey? Those of us who've been living in New York City our whole lives, it might be a little too much pressure to go straight, wilderness. We might need to just develop suburbia surroundings and suburbia mindset.
Well, the
And that
question
would,
I guess I'm asking is, what do you think? Like in me making that statement, what do you think my conclusion is that like I'm telling you?
no, I apologize for cutting you off because I didn't
No, no,
allow
no.
you to
I'm
complete.
asking. I'm asking. Like, what do you think I'm trying to get across to you? Like, what do you
Make
think?
make the relationships with people in trails, and it will come. You have to
No. All
put the
right, good.
foot.
Let me clarify. I didn't really articulate it properly. If the idea is you want to have a property that you can build on, make sure like building a house up to standard. I don't know if you can do that for under $50,000 or $60,000, right? So if you're not going to do a house to standard, if you're talking about a single wide that might be there, or putting a trailer there, or getting an Airstream, or doing a tiny house, how that works. If you're in a suburban area, they don't like those things. Rural areas let you do a lot more with is my land. If you sit on a quarter to a half acre of property, you have a neighbor, and your property affects their property values. So then also, if your goal is to bring people out to get accustomed to the wood, and you don't have access to any woods, you're shooting yourself in the foot. If you're bringing people out to experience the woods, and camping in your yard is like being in New Jersey, but like where you see the house, is that what people would want to come do? And if so, then run it. Like
Well,
I'm,
Westboro is kind of ruralish.
you know,
a little rural.
and so I think it's the idea of
Yo, Melissa, I really like. I want to send it. I gotta send this to you because I really feel like I have found
It-
something that's
it-
special.
It's funny, Rob, because that's the first house we ever found that we liked. The first property we liked. It ended up being too crazy for us because of some other things, but it was awesome. It was in Wurtsboro. It was the first place we almost put down on.
Yeah.
And
But
then
there
I'm
were
thinking about this too. Some of us don't even have cars. You're blessed to have a car, Melissa, right? Some of us don't even have cars. Some of us don't even have licenses. This place that I found in Wurtsboro, they have a bus that leaves there 3 times a day and comes 3 times a day. So it's also that transportation that allows you to get to where you want to get to.
Rob, let me know if I'm reading this right. It sounds like you're trying to convince us that this is a good.
No,
Wait. I'm just asking. Just a question. Can I finish the question? It sounds like you asked us thoughts about it, but it sounds like you're actually just convincing us why it's good. I don't question if it's good.
yes.
I think what I'm saying is you've now mentioned multiple directions that don't all fit in what you're now saying. So that if the area is A, B, or C, you will be allowed to do one part of it. But if it's that, you won't be able to do the other part unless
Gotcha.
you talk to people. So I'm not saying it's a bad. I think it's a great idea. What I'm saying is now start calling offices.
And do the
That
work. That's what I've been doing.
is
Slowly,
called,
slowly.
yeah. Call the zoning office. Call the building department office. It will be the same person that does a lot of stuff. And start building relationships and figure out like the real, because like there are plenty of things they tell you you're not allowed to do till you get a lawyer, and the lawyer knows how to file it for you. No.
You're gonna come in?
Yeah. And so I think any idea y'all have where I'm not like that's illegal or sounds like you'll hate it, I'm in full support. Like I'm already on the, which is why I'm like, call the office. like
And I think Sullivan County is a fun one.
Yeah.
Plus, I love the halfway point part.
Yeah.
Chris, find me inside.
I'll see you inside. Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think in finding other let's say contributors, what my friend Elias told me a number of years ago, he had some idea of he was trying to raise outrageous amounts of money to do a project that would bring communities together in Ethiopia, specifically Addis, the capital, and at the time I think Atlanta, because that's where he was. And the amount of money, I was like, bro, how are you ever going to get anyone to give you or donate that much money? And he was like, I don't know, but the more specific I am about exactly what I need the money for and exactly what things cost and map out everything I can for people, they seem to like be on board and trust it. And so that's another part of, Rob, as you're looking to gain either investors or people that will be able to assist or help, is the more you have kind of tracked or mapped out for them, even if the stuff changes or even if it's not totally set in stone, the more it seems likely that people can then get on board, if that makes sense.
100%.
And again, you can still have variation or not like be locked in, committed, like, all right, here's exactly what I'll have to do. But I think it gives people a starting point of their imaginations can also start going on it and can take the figures or the numbers you've shown them and do something with it.
Copy.
Now before I'm about to go into this rest stop, but before we conclude this evening's discussion, were there any other last questions?
Man, what was I gonna say? I think oh, simple question, just like straightforward. And if you don't know the answer, maybe you just tell me, how confident you are given what you do know. Like, I'm curious, I'm thinking about this difference just between real estate and land and what the relative kind of risks and benefits are and all of that. But I was thinking when it comes to like the conservation land, you guys bought that when? Like now, how long ago was that?
3 years ago.
3 years ago. So if you sold it today, like, would you make a profit?
Yes, because we raised the money and we told everyone in raising the money what we plan to do with it and made it clear that we are a LLC, not a not-for-profit, and we are fully entitled to any revenue that's generated from that property sale. So if you are in a community of people that support like that, where over 3 years you generate gifts leading towards the purchase of the property, it becomes a moral consideration for you of, if you sell it, make that money, do you do something to go back into the community and get another one or do something that is of benefit to people? Or did you basically lie and tell people you were community oriented and just wanted to make a little bit of money after 2 or 3 years?
Chris,
I just mean that's interesting because that's that's just conservation land. Like that's just land that is being held for for purposes of nature conservation and no one can build on it, and yet still like it's accruing value. Like that's kind of promising,
But is it accruing value?
That property, basically, it depends on the market, right? The biggest problem I think you're going to have with selling quote unquote vacant land will be the potential buyer. Housing is necessary. Developers need land to build more housing. Corporations need land to build more factories or buildings, whatever they do to make money, storage facilities. Municipalities need land for a variety of things. If you don't have
land, can't be built on.
It doesn't matter. If you have what I was going to say is, if you have a circle of people that look to buy what you sell, you'll always be able to sell it. But how many people know other people that need vacant land? Most people deal with people that are renting or they own a house. How many people deal with folks that own that like are buying vacant land to turn it into houses? You'd have to know developers. You'd have to know businesses. You'd have to know municipal like employees, so that when opportunities came up and the state is like, we need to buy land to turn into an aquifer or whatever the hell they're going to do, you're able to put in your property in the bid, Most people don't know how to do that.
With your house, there are agents that want to help you sell your house. There are far fewer agents that want to help you sell your land, unless you have really large acreage or it's really beautiful or farmable. So the fear you have, Grant, is you buy a property you're never able to sell, or you're only able to sell for just about as much as you purchased it. The advantage of real estate and the obvious uniqueness is the fact that while you use it, it accrues, right? Everything else, like you buy a car, as soon as you drive it off the lot, you're losing value. You buy music equipment, unless it's vintage or special, as you use it, it actually decreases in value, you know? Whereas with the house, if you take care of it properly, it increases in value over time while you use it. And so the land has the same potential. If you improve the land with very minimal, let's say, capital improvements, you can increase its value a lot. And if it's a mixed use commercial property, you can infuse value into commercial properties by changing its revenue stream potential. And that's different than normal residential stuff where the value is comped or based on the other properties around it or what you convince someone they'll buy, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting. Makes me think just also like how like many people buying land would just like I don't know how normal it is to like test the soil and do all the things that you would want to do to see just how healthy the ecosystem is. But it seems to me like that 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 would be a smart move, right? Like, know how fertile the land is that you're buying, and then imagine like someone nearby, like a power plant or something, like somehow pollutes the land, or there's some other kind of change to the soil that results from something that someone else did. The legal kind of accountability aspect and what you can kind of hold people to account for. I'm sure that stuff gets overlooked all the time when it comes to just the value of land.
Yeah, I mean, you want to make sure you're in the Northeast, you don't have such a separation of mineral, water, air, and your land rights. In other parts of the country, you do. So in California, New Mexico, Colorado, places like that, you may buy land and then you find out there's silver on it, but you don't own mineral rights. You dig it up, and someone who owned the property 4 generations ago actually has rights to all the minerals on it. Or in other parts of the
Wow.
country, it's water rights, so that you can't divert water to or from your property. You can't build a pond. You can't do anything dealing with water without heavy approval, or additional payments.
Is that normal? Like, can you the most land you buy, does it come with mineral rights? Does it come with water rights? Like what?
2 seconds. Can I get an ice cream on there? Yeah, hold on.
I think water rights is more so if you have access to lake, like Chris Carr's land upstate, has water
Right.
rights because they have a lake. So that means that gives them right and access to the lakes.
So 2 different types of water rights. One is a like right of access, or the ability to make use of the waterways, and it's not public, right? There's someone who owns the property surrounding the lake, and they sell different parts of it. After a certain point, a lake association makes an agreement between all the property owners of a public access point. And that's then my right of access to the lake is through that public one, because my house isn't directly on the lake. The other type of water rights are, can you drill a well and use that water? In some places, no, you cannot pull any water from the aquifer. You cannot pull any water from the ground because of the local municipality is restricted water use. In other places, you can have a well and you may be able to then use it for drinking water in your house and for a single family house, but you are not able to use water for the cattle. That's it. Thank you. Okay. And so there are restrictive elements to some of the water rights laws or rules or what rights you have. Then there's how can I explain this, right? When we think of land or we think of selling a house, there is let's say the physical house that has been built on the land that is owned, right, as an object. There's the land itself that is owned. Then you have air rights that are connected to the land. You have mineral rights, you have water rights that are connected to the land, but they don't inherently all convey in conglomeration. So depending on where you are, it has been broken, and even your mineral rights are broken into the differences between petroleum versus natural gas versus there's some new elements now they're using to turn into possible fuel sources. Those all convey differently. And so you may have mineral rights and oil rights, but it doesn't mean you can do this bio whatever sludge that they use now. And so it's actually very complicated, and you would want to know how those things work in your particular municipality, if that makes sense. Do not assume just because the house or the property is being sold that you own everything on it, under it, or above it.
Yeah. Good thing to keep in mind.
All right, so we I think are about to wrap up. Any other last questions?
Nah.
And I want to get a group together. I don't know if it's going to be from the friends that I've had, and I don't say this in any way that's disparaging or derogatory, but in music, you know, there's a certain amount of time where I only wanted to work with people I liked, that I knew, that I was comfortable with. And there was a personal element to that, and we were traveling and living together, basically, like when you're on the road or you're in the van, you know, however many hours a day, and you're sharing living spaces, and you got to deal with their personal habits and stuff. I wasn't into doing that with strangers. With land, though, it requires so much that we might not be able to do it with people we already know. We may have to go recruit the people who are already like-minded and who haven't found the other like-minded people. And that's going to be a process. And now Melissa and I have something to show, so that when we went out and talked to people, they looked at us like, that's great. Y'all talk well, but where's your property? What'd you ever do? What loan did you get? How you do the money? And we couldn't say anything 3 years ago. Now we can. And so I think that's also part of the process, to answer your earlier question.
Cool.
All right. So we good?
Yep.
All right. Let's check in, and I'll be having some updates by next week. Some new things are brewing.
Nice. Cool, man. All right.
Summer camp for adults. The flyers are just about done, and we'll be able to start talking about actual programming next week.
Dope.
Awesome.
All right. Is there anything you want to say on the way out?
Bye, everyone. Nice chatting with you.
Bye, Melissa. Same here.
Peace.
All right, peace.
Well, that went well. BK? Hold on, let me set this up. Hey, Gravity, did you just show up?
Hello?
Did you just show up?
No, I've been here for a while.
Oh, you've
I
been
was-
here for a while. Good. All right. Well, we're on our way back to New York. Are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're on our way back to New York. And if you're around in the next few days, I'll be at Gamba. Come jam, and I can catch you up on anything you missed in the meeting.
Okay.
All right?
Yep.
All right, bet.
Okay.
All right. Oh, tequila, well.
Mhm.